directly to the killer, who may be in this room.
I'm Riley. I'm with the Indiana State Police. I'm the Public Information Officer from the Lafayette Post.
Steve Mullen, Delphi Police Department, Chief of Police.
Topaz, I'm Big Carroll County Sheriff.
February 13th, 2017. A Monday that did not feel important. In the small town of Delphi, winter was beginning to loosen its grip. The air was cold, but not brutal. The kind of afternoon where the sky looks pale and distant, and time seems slower than usual. School had been canceled that day. For most teenagers, that meant sleep, television, scrolling through a phone. But for two friends, Abigail Williams and Liberty German, it meant something simple. A walk. They asked for a ride to the Monon High Bridge Trail, a place locals knew well. It wasn't hidden, it wasn't remote in a dramatic sense, it was familiar, almost ordinary. That's what makes this story unsettling. Nothing about that day felt dramatic. Liberty, known to many as Libby, was 14. Outgoing. Curious. She liked documenting moments, taking pictures, recording small pieces of life. Abigail, Abby, was 13. Quiet. Gentle. The kind of presence that didn't demand attention but filled space softly. Two girls. An afternoon off. A bridge that had stood for decades. They were dropped off around 1:30 p.m. There was no tension in that moment, no visible threat, no sense that something irreversible was about to unfold. The Monon High Bridge itself carried history in its wooden planks and rusted rails. It stretched high above Deer Creek, narrow and uneven. Walking across it required balance, care, awareness of each step. It was the kind of place teenagers visited for photos. And that's exactly what they did. At approximately 2:07 p.m., Liberty posted a photograph of Abby walking across the bridge, Abby's figure small against the vast winter landscape. The trees were bare. The sky washed in gray light. It looked peaceful. That image would later become one of the most recognized photos in modern true crime history. But in that moment, it was just a snapshot. A memory captured casually. There were no alarms. No warnings. Hours passed. By late afternoon, the plan was simple. Someone would pick them up. They were expected home. The routine of small-town life continued uninterrupted. Until it didn't. When the girls failed to arrive at the designated pickup location, confusion set in. At first, it was minor. Maybe they had lost track of time. Maybe the phone battery had died. Maybe they were still walking. But as daylight began to fade, unease took shape. Calls were made. Messages sent. No response. Family members arrived at the trailhead. They walked the paths, called their names into the cooling air.
Still nothing. As darkness fell, volunteers began gathering. Flashlights flickered along the wooded trails. Neighbors joined in. Friends. Strangers. Delphi is not a large city. When something is wrong, people know quickly. And when children are missing, the entire community moves. By night, the search had grown urgent. The bridge that felt harmless hours earlier now stood as a silent witness. Somewhere along those trails, something had shifted. By the morning of February 14th, the search intensified. Law enforcement expanded the area. Terrain was examined carefully. And then, the search ended. Authorities confirmed that the bodies of the two girls had been found near the trail. The announcement was brief, measured, controlled. Shock settled over Delphi like a second winter. This was no longer a missing persons case. It was a double homicide. For a town of roughly 3,000 people, the impact was immediate and profound. Delphi was the kind of place where doors were often left unlocked, where neighbors knew each other's routines, where children rode bikes without fear. That illusion cracked overnight. But what made the situation even more disturbing was what wasn't immediately known. There was no suspect named, no arrest, no public explanation, just a growing question that began circulating quietly. Who did this? And perhaps even more unsettling, was he still here? Because in small towns, violence feels personal. It doesn't feel like a headline. It feels close, too close. In the days that followed, memorials appeared. Flowers, stuffed animals, handwritten notes, photographs printed and taped to wooden crosses. The community mourned together, but beneath the grief was something heavier, a realization. The person responsible had walked those same paths, breathed the same air, stood on that same bridge, and then disappeared back into ordinary life. The stillness of February 13th had been deceptive, because sometimes the most terrifying stories do not begin with chaos. They begin with calm. And no one on that pale winter afternoon could have imagined that Delphi was stepping into a mystery that would stretch not for weeks, not for months, but for 7 years.
Before we start, support the channel by liking and subscribing. In the days after the discovery, grief filled the town. But grief was quickly followed by something heavier: uncertainty. Law enforcement held press conferences, but information was limited. Details were withheld. Questions were deflected. The investigation, they said, was active and ongoing. Behind the scenes, something critical had already changed the trajectory of the case. Liberty German's phone had captured more than a photograph. It had captured a presence. Investigators recovered video recorded on the Monon High Bridge that afternoon. The footage was brief, unsteady, taken discreetly. A man walking toward the girls, his hands in his pockets, his body language calm, measured. He did not rush. He did not appear panicked. He walked as if he belonged there. That detail lingered. He looked comfortable, as if the bridge was not unfamiliar to him. Authorities released a still image first, a cropped frame from the video. A man on the bridge, blue jacket, blue jeans, a cap or hood, head slightly down. The image was grainy, pixelated, distant, but it was enough. Across Indiana, and soon across the country, people stared at that photo, trying to see something more, trying to recognize a face that was barely visible. It was unsettling not because it was clear, but because it wasn't. The man became known simply as Bridge Guy, an identity reduced to a location, a silhouette suspended in time. Then came the audio.
There's no path going there, so we have to go down here. Hi.
A short clip extracted from the same recording. Just a few words. Guys, down the hill. The voice was low, controlled, not aggressive, not shouted. It sounded conversational. That tone disturbed people more than if he had screamed, because it suggested confidence, authority.
Investigators asked the public a simple question. Do you recognize this voice? Tips flooded in, thousands within days. People thought they recognized coworkers, neighbors, former classmates, distant relatives. The volume of information became overwhelming. Every lead had to be evaluated, every possibility considered. In a small town, suspicion spreads quickly. Trust erodes quietly. The first composite sketch was released months later. It depicted an older male. Hat, facial hair, a serious expression. For many, it felt plausible. But in 2019, investigators did something unexpected. They unveiled a second sketch. This one portrayed a younger man. Clean-shaven. More defined features. Different structure. The shift created confusion. Had they been wrong before? Were they now certain? Or was this still a moving target? During a press conference that year, officials addressed the killer directly. They spoke as if he were watching, because they believed he was. "You never thought we would shift gears," one official said. "We have likely interviewed you." The message was deliberate, calculated. It suggested proximity. It implied that the man in the image was not a stranger passing through. He was local. He knew the trails. He understood the area. And he had blended back into normal life. That idea unsettled Delphi more than anything else. Because if he was local, he had been attending community events, standing in grocery store lines, sitting in traffic, existing within plain sight. Years passed. The case did not disappear. It transformed. National media covered it extensively. Podcasts dissected every frame of the video. Online communities slowed down the footage, enhanced shadows, debated clothing layers. Some believed they saw a weapon concealed beneath the jacket. Others argued about height, weight, posture. The speculation became endless. But speculation is not evidence. And evidence, in this case, was scarce, at least publicly. Law enforcement remained tight-lipped. They confirmed that the recording was longer than what had been released, but they did not reveal everything. Why? Because sometimes investigators hold back details to protect the integrity of the case, to filter out false confessions, to preserve facts only the perpetrator would know. Meanwhile, the families endured a different kind of time. Time measured not in days, but in anniversaries. Birthdays without celebration. Graduations that would never happen. Memorial services revisited each year. 7 years is a long stretch of waiting. For answers. For accountability. For resolution. In Delphi, the bridge remained physically unchanged. Tourists began visiting. Some out of curiosity. Some out of morbid fascination. Others out of respect. The wooden planks still creaked underfoot. The wind still moved through bare branches. Nature did not pause, but the town did, in subtle ways. People locked doors more consistently. Parents tracked their children's locations. Casual trust faded. The voice from the recording lingered in collective memory. "Guys, down the hill." 4 words. Simple, ordinary, and yet impossible to forget. The question remained constant. How could someone commit a crime so bold, in daylight, and vanish? For years there was no public arrest, no suspect charged, just the echo of a voice, and the image of a man walking toward 2 girls.
For years, the case felt suspended. Not forgotten, but unmoving. Press conferences came and went. Investigators repeated familiar phrases. They reassured the public that progress was being made, that tips were being reviewed, that the case remained active. But there was no visible breakthrough. In true crime culture, unsolved cases often fade with time. Public attention drifts, media cycles shift, new headlines replace old ones. The Delphi murders did not disappear. They lingered. Partly because of the image, partly because of the voice, and partly because the crime felt so close to ordinary life. 2 teenagers on a public trail, in daylight, within a small community. The idea that the perpetrator could simply blend back into routine unsettled people far beyond Indiana. Behind the scenes, investigators continued working quietly. Thousands of tips had to be processed, digital evidence re-examined, interviews revisited. Technology evolved during those 7 years. Forensic tools improved. Data analysis became more refined. What may not have been clear in 2017
could look different in 2021. Cases like this do not remain static. They accumulate layers. And sometimes the break does not come from something dramatic. Sometimes it comes from something small. A detail reevaluated. A statement reconsidered. A timeline adjusted. In October 2022, something shifted. Authorities announced the arrest of a man named Richard Allen. The name did not immediately resonate nationally. He was not a drifter, not someone passing through. He lived in Delphi. He worked locally. He had been part of the community during the time of the murders. That revelation landed heavily, because it reinforced the suspicion many had carried for years. The killer had not been far away. He had been here. Public records showed that Allen had voluntarily spoken to law enforcement shortly after the murders in 2017. He had placed himself near the trail that day. He admitted to being on the bridge. At the time, that information did not lead to an arrest. Years passed. But in 2022, investigators returned to that statement. According to court documents, new analysis connected a firearm owned by Allen to an unspent cartridge found near the crime scene. The detail was technical, complex, but significant. For the first time, there was a tangible forensic link tying a specific individual to evidence recovered from the scene. The probable cause affidavit was partially unsealed. Portions were still redacted, but enough became public to reshape the narrative.
Allen was charged with murder. He pleaded not guilty. The arrest did not immediately bring clarity. Instead, it introduced a new phase of uncertainty. Questions emerged. Why had it taken 5 years to arrest him? The pieces now fit. For the community, emotions were complicated. There was relief, but also disbelief. Richard Allen had been described as quiet, unassuming. He had worked at a local pharmacy. People reported brief, ordinary interactions with him. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would stand out. That normalcy became part of the discomfort. Because the image of Bridge Guy had always seemed ambiguous. But Allen's face was clear, familiar, human. The myth of a faceless figure began to dissolve. Replaced by a man with a name, an address, a routine. In small towns, proximity changes everything. It is one thing to imagine a stranger committing violence. It is another to realize the person may have stood in line behind you. The legal process moved forward slowly. Pre-trial hearings. Motions filed. Arguments over evidence. Requests for venue changes. The case had already consumed years. Now it entered its most scrutinized phase. The trial would not just determine guilt or innocence. It would revisit the entire history of the investigation. Every decision. Every delay. Every preserved detail. 7 years after the murders, Delphi was no longer waiting for an arrest. It was waiting for answers. And the shift from mystery to courtroom did not reduce tension. It amplified it. Because now the question was no longer, who did this? It became, can it be proven?
Directly to the killer, who may be in this room.
I'm Riley. I'm with the Indiana State Police. I'm the Public Information Officer from the Lafayette Post.
Steve Mullen, Delphi Police Department, Chief of Police.
Topalize, I'm Big Carroll County Sheriff.
The courtroom was quiet, almost suffocating. Years of waiting had led to this moment.
February 2024. The defendant, Richard Allen, sat at the defense table, calm on the surface, eyes fixed forward, hands folded. The courtroom was full. Reporters, families, locals, and legal professionals. Cameras, allowed under specific rules, captured angles of the trial, but the most important moments were those not broadcast. Those were private, held in the controlled hush of the room. The prosecution opened with a statement. It was deliberate, precise, and devoid of theatrics. The goal was to present facts in a way that painted the sequence of events clearly, without exaggeration. They revisited February 13, 2017. The walk, the bridge, the ordinary afternoon that ended in tragedy. They introduced the photographs, the video from Liberty's phone, the audio clip. Each element dissected, explained, analyzed. The jurors watched, listening carefully, absorbing the details slowly, like a puzzle being built piece by piece. Witnesses were called. Law enforcement officers testified about the initial investigation, about the collection of evidence, the recording of statements, and the painstaking reconstruction of the timeline. Every small decision, every detail, had been documented. The jury was led to see that no step had been taken lightly, no assumption left unexamined.
Then came forensic experts. Technical, dry, unemotional. The connection between the firearm and the cartridge was explained. The process detailed. Probabilities calculated. Measurements taken. They laid out the scientific foundation carefully. No sensationalism, just methodical explanation. The defense was next. Their approach was cautious, deliberate. They questioned the certainty of the evidence, highlighted inconsistencies in recollections, presented alternative interpretations. They worked to introduce doubt, slowly, subtly, without anger or aggression. Their goal was to humanize Allen, to make the jury see him not as a silhouette from a video, but as someone familiar, someone ordinary. The tension in the room built slowly, not through shouting, not through emotion, but through the accumulation of details, the sheer weight of evidence, the quiet insistence of facts converging. Family members of the victims were present, their faces composed, yet revealing quiet torment. Every detail shown on a screen brought memories back. A photograph, a sentence, a name, reminders of a life taken too early. Their grief was restrained, controlled, almost contained, but it lingered in the air, shaping the emotional atmosphere.
Days turned into weeks. Testimony continued. Evidence was examined in layers. The jurors became immersed in the timeline, in the sequence of events, in the subtle nuances of behavior and observation. Every piece of evidence became a thread in the tapestry of the narrative. Outside the courtroom, Delphi watched. News reports dissected each session. Online forums debated testimony. Every frame of the video, every word of the recording, was analyzed publicly. The national attention reflected a collective fascination with the process, the slow, careful unveiling of truth after years of uncertainty. By the final days, the trial felt almost ritualistic. The jury had absorbed the story from beginning to end. They understood the weight of the evidence, the scrutiny of the investigation, the patience of the detectives, the precision of the forensic work, the careful presentation of witness testimony. And then came deliberation. The moment the decision was removed from the courtroom, transferred to the jury room, silence returned to the hall. Every spectator, every family member, every reporter waited. The small city held its collective breath. 7 years of unanswered questions culminated in this private room. The verdict would not simply declare guilt or innocence. It would bring closure, an acknowledgement of the truth that had remained hidden for so long.
The door opened. The jury returned. The foreperson spoke.
The words were measured. They carried weight, and they concluded the process. The trial was over. The truth, painstakingly assembled over 7 years, had been presented. For Delphi, for the victims, and for the families, it was a moment of reckoning, a shift from uncertainty to closure, from speculation to certainty, from shadow to recognition.
The verdict was read on a late spring morning in 2024. Richard Allen was found guilty of 2 counts of murder in the first degree. The courtroom, which had been tense for weeks, held its breath as the 4-person's words echoed through the chamber. Guilty. The word was simple, yet carried the weight of years of grief, investigation, and speculation. For the families, relief mingled with exhaustion. 7 years of uncertainty, of waking to a question with no answer, had finally reached a resolution. Abigail and Liberty's parents sat quietly, absorbing the reality. They had imagined this moment countless times, but the finality was both shocking and inevitable. The judge handed down the sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, no chance for early release, no loopholes, a definitive statement from the judicial system that this crime would not be forgotten and its perpetrator would never re-enter society. The room was silent as the sentence was pronounced. Some wept softly, some remained stoic. The weight of years pressed heavily on every shoulder. Delphi, as a community, began to process the long shadow the murders had cast. Ordinary life slowly returned to its routines, but nothing could ever be completely the same. Parents remained vigilant. Children were watched a little more closely. Doors were locked. Trails, once familiar and comforting, held a subtle unease. The bridge where the tragedy occurred was visited by some to pay respects, by others out of curiosity, and by many simply to remember.
Media coverage followed the verdict. National news outlets summarized the trial. Podcasts dissected every testimony. Online forums debated details of evidence, strategy, and the conduct of lawyers. But for the people of Delphi, it was not speculation or commentary that mattered most. It was closure, a confirmation that justice, slow and painstaking, had been served. Psychologically, the case left a mark. For families of victims, it was a journey through grief, resilience, and finally, acknowledgement. For the town, it was a long confrontation with the idea that evil could exist close to home, hidden in plain sight. Delphi was forever altered, but also strengthened. People spoke differently about trust, about vigilance, about community. Ordinary life returned, but with a new awareness of the fragility of safety. In the months following the trial, memorials were held. School programs discussed safety and awareness. Local law enforcement shared lessons learned with surrounding communities. Abigail and Liberty were remembered not only for the tragedy they endured, but for the vibrancy and curiosity they carried in life. Their story became a cautionary tale, yes, but also a tribute to youth, friendship, and resilience. Years later, the case remains a touchstone in true crime studies. It illustrates the meticulous process of investigation, the evolution of forensic technology, and the enduring impact of crime on small communities. It is studied in law schools, referenced in psychology programs, and discussed in media ethics courses.
And yet, beneath all the analysis and commentary, the human story remains central. 2 young lives stolen, a town forever changed, a slow, deliberate pursuit of justice that ultimately prevailed. The bridge, the trail, the photograph, the voice, these remain as echoes, reminders of what happened, and markers of the endurance of those who sought truth. The verdict did not erase the pain, but it offered a form of closure, a statement from society that some wrongs are so grave, so undeniable,
that they demand permanent recognition and accountability. For Delphi, and for everyone who followed the case, the lesson is complex. Tragedy can strike anywhere, in any community. But diligence, patience, and the relentless pursuit of evidence can eventually reveal the truth, hold perpetrators accountable, and offer a measure of justice, even after years of uncertainty. The city, quiet once again, carries the memories with a collective consciousness, a subtle, enduring vigilance, born from the knowledge of what occurred on a winter afternoon in 2017. The shadow lingers, but it does not define the town. Life continues, shaped by memory, strengthened by resilience, and marked by a solemn acknowledgement of the past.
What do you think motivated him to commit such a crime? You can share your opinion in the comments.